The Valorian species had lived in peace for 3,000 years. They were tall beings with silver skin and 4 arms. They built great libraries and beautiful cities. They traded with other species across the stars. They studied science and art and music. They had never known war. They had never needed weapons. They believed that all intelligent life would choose peace over violence. They were wrong. The Krath swarm came without warning. One day, the skies of Valoria Prime were clear and blue. The next day, they were filled with darkness. Massive organic ships blocked out the sun. They looked like living things, with skin instead of metal and veins that pulsed with strange light. These ships opened their bellies and released millions of creatures onto the planet below. The Krath were monsters. They had no culture, no art, no desire for peace. They existed only to consume. They ate everything in their path: cities, forests, people. Nothing was safe from their hunger. They moved across the land like a wave of death, leaving nothing but empty ground behind them. High Counselor Theverin stood in his tower and watched his world burn. He was old, even by Valorian standards. He had seen his people grow and prosper for 200 years. Now he watched them die. "What can we do?" asked his advisor, a young female named Serena. Her silver skin had turned pale with fear. "We have no army. We have no weapons. We cannot fight them." Theverin closed his 4 eyes and thought. The Valorians had friends among the stars, but those friends were far away. Even if they wanted to help, they could not arrive in time. The Krath would consume everything long before help could come. "There is one thing we have not tried," Theverin said slowly. "We could send a message into the unknown regions." Serena looked at him with shock. "The unknown regions? We do not know what lives there. We do not know if anyone lives there at all." "That is true," Theverin agreed. "But we have no other choice. If we do nothing, we die. If we ask for help and no one answers, we die. But if someone does answer, if someone out there cares enough to come, then maybe our people have a chance." The message was sent that night. It traveled across frequencies that the Valorians had never used before, reaching into parts of the galaxy they had never explored. The message was simple. It told of their people, their danger, and their desperate need for help. It promised nothing in return. The Valorians had nothing left to give. Theverin did not expect an answer. He sent the message because it was all he could do. Then he returned to watching his world die. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue planet called Earth. The message arrived. Lieutenant Katie Morris was working the night shift at the Nevada Deep Space Monitoring Station. It was a boring job most nights. She sat in a dark room filled with computers and listened to the sounds of the universe. Usually, she heard nothing but static and the natural noise of distant stars. Tonight was different. Tonight, her computer started beeping in a way she had never heard before. She put on her headphones and listened. What she heard made her heart stop. It was a voice. Not a human voice, but a voice nonetheless. It was speaking in a language she did not understand, but the emotion behind it was clear. Fear. Desperation. A cry for help. Katie immediately called her supervisor. Within an hour, the best language experts on Earth were working to decode the message. It took them 3 hours to understand it. When they did, they went quiet. The message was played for the United Earth Defense Council the next morning. Admiral Jake Preston sat at the head of the table and listened. He was 62 years old, with gray hair and a face full of scars from the Mars Colony Rebellion. He had spent his entire life fighting, first for his country, and then for all of humanity. He had hoped to retire soon. He had hoped his fighting days were over. When the message ended, the room was silent. "They are asking for help," said Councilwoman Patricia Lane. "A species we have never met, on a world we have never seen. They are being destroyed, and they are asking the universe for help. "We cannot help them," said General Marcus Webb. "We have only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Our fleet is small. We know nothing about this enemy. It would be foolish to send our ships into unknown space to fight an unknown war." Admiral Preston said nothing. He just listened as the council argued back and forth. Some wanted to help. Others thought it was too dangerous. Some did not care about aliens at all. Why should humanity risk itself for strangers? The argument went on for 6 hours. Finally, Admiral Preston stood up. The room went quiet. Everyone respected the old soldier, even those who disagreed with him. "I have listened to all of your arguments," he said. "I understand the risks. I know that we might lose ships and soldiers. I know that we might fail. But I also know this. Someone out there is dying. Someone sent a message into the darkness, hoping that anyone would hear. Anyone at all. And we heard them." He looked around the room at each council member. "What kind of people are we if we hear a cry for help and do nothing? What does that say about humanity? We have spent our entire history fighting each other. We have done terrible things to ourselves. But we have also done great things. We have helped each other in times of need. We have crossed oceans and mountains to save strangers. That is who we are. That is who we should be." He paused for a moment. "I say we answer the call." The vote was held immediately. It was unanimous. Humanity would go to war for strangers. Admiral Preston walked out of the council chamber and headed straight for the shipyard. The carrier Resolute was waiting for him there, along with 12 other ships. They were not the biggest or strongest ships in the galaxy, but they were crewed by humans, and that would have to be enough. He stood before the gathered crews and looked at their faces. Young men and women, soldiers and engineers, doctors and pilots. They did not know what waited for them in the unknown regions. They did not know if they would survive. But every single one of them had volunteered. "Today, we received a message from across the galaxy," Admiral Preston said. "A people we have never met are facing extinction. They asked for help, not knowing if anyone would answer. We are going to answer. We are going to fly into the unknown, face an enemy we have never seen, and fight for people we have never met. Some of us will not come back, but we will go anyway, because that is what humans do. We help, we fight. We never abandon those in need." The crews cheered. The ships began to power up, and humanity set course for the stars, ready to show the galaxy what they were made of. The battle began at dawn. Admiral Preston stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched the Krath fleet move toward his ships. There were hundreds of them, organic vessels that pulsed with strange life. They moved through space like living creatures, twisting and turning in ways that metal ships could not. They were heading straight for the human fleet. "All ships, engage," Preston ordered. The first wave of missiles launched from the human vessels, streaking across the void like shooting stars. They slammed into the Krath ships and exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Some of the enemy vessels were destroyed instantly. Others kept coming, their organic hulls healing the damage even as they moved. The Krath returned fire. Strange energy blasts shot from their ships, green and pulsing with power. The destroyer Vanguard took a direct hit and broke apart. The cruiser Dauntless lost half its crew in a single moment. Captain Danny Cole of the destroyer Defiant pushed his ship to the front of the battle. He was a young captain, only 30 years old, with wild black hair and a reputation for taking risks. His crew loved him because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. "Target their weapons," he ordered. "Get in close and hit them hard." The Defiant dove into the enemy formation, weaving between Krath ships that were 10 times its size. It fired constantly, its guns blazing against the organic hulls. The ship took hit after hit, but it kept fighting. Back on the Resolute, Admiral Preston watched the battle unfold. His ships were holding their own, but they were taking heavy losses. The Krath had numbers on their side. For every enemy vessel they destroyed, 3 more took its place. "Admiral," said his communications officer, "we are receiving reports from the ground. The Krath have launched a major assault on Thever." Preston closed his eyes for a moment. The battle in space was important, but the real fight was on the planet. If they lost the capital city, the war was over. "Tell Commander Hopper to hold the line," he said. "Whatever it takes." On the surface of Valoria Prime, Sam Harper was already in the middle of a nightmare. Thousands of Krath soldiers were pouring through the streets of Thever, climbing over barriers and swarming through buildings. They were horrific creatures, twisted combinations of insect and reptile, with sharp claws and mouths full of teeth. "Fall back to the second line," Sam shouted into his radio. "Everyone, fall back." His Marines retreated through the burning streets, firing their weapons at the endless wave of enemies. For every Krath they killed, 2 more appeared. The creatures showed no fear, no hesitation. They simply kept coming, driven by the will of their queens. Private Amy Mitchell stumbled and fell as a Krath soldier leaped at her. She screamed as the creature raised its claws. Before it could strike, Sergeant Nick Torres appeared and put 3 rounds into its head. "Get up!" Nick yelled, pulling Amy to her feet. "We are not dying here." They ran together through the smoke and chaos, joining the rest of their squad behind a makeshift barrier. Sam was already there, directing fire at the advancing horde. "How many of them are there?" Amy asked, her voice shaking. "Too many," Sam replied. "But we hold this line. The civilians are evacuating behind us. We give them time." The Valorians were watching the battle from the shelters below the city. High Counselor Thevern stood with Serena, observing the humans through security cameras. What he saw amazed him. The humans were losing. Their numbers were too small, and the Krath were too many. Any logical species would retreat. Any sane being would surrender. But the humans did not stop. They kept fighting, kept dying, kept pushing back against an enemy that should have overwhelmed them hours ago. "Why do they not run?" Serena asked quietly. "Because they cannot," Thevern said. "They know that if they run, we die. So they stay. They fight. They sacrifice themselves for people they have never met." In orbit, the battle had reached a critical point. Half of the human fleet was destroyed or damaged. The Resolute itself had taken multiple hits, and fires burned on 3 decks. But Admiral Preston refused to retreat. "Captain Cole," he said over the radio, "I need you to lead a charge. Break through their line and create an opening." Danny Cole smiled grimly. "Understood, Admiral. It has been an honor." The Defiant led 3 other ships in a desperate charge toward the center of the Krath formation. They moved at full speed, firing everything they had. The enemy concentrated their fire on the small group, and the ships began to take terrible damage. The cruiser Horizon exploded. The frigate Stalwart broke apart. But the Defiant kept going, its hull cracked and burning, its crew refusing to give up. "All power to forward weapons," Danny ordered. "If we are going down, we are taking them with us." The Defiant slammed into a Krath carrier, its guns firing point-blank into the enemy hull. Both ships exploded together in a massive fireball that lit up the void. "Admiral," Preston watched the explosion with tears in his eyes. Danny Cole was dead. Hundreds of his people were dead. But the sacrifice had worked. The Krath formation was broken, and there was now an opening in their lines. "All ships, press the attack," Preston ordered. "Make their sacrifice worth something." On the ground, Sam Harper received word of the fleet's success. The Krath forces on the surface had suddenly become confused, their coordination failing as the fleet above was disrupted. It was a small window, but it was enough. "Push forward," Sam shouted. "Drive them back." The Marines charged into the enemy ranks with renewed energy. They fought with fists and knives when their guns ran empty. They dragged wounded friends to safety while shooting at enemies with their free hands. They sang old songs from Earth, songs about freedom and courage and never giving up. Lieutenant Maria Santos led a squad around the enemy flank, hitting them from a direction they did not expect. She was a tough woman from Texas who had grown up on a ranch before joining the military. She fought like she had nothing to lose because she had already decided that losing was not an option. "For Earth," she screamed as she charged. "For Valoria." Her squad followed her without hesitation. They broke through the craft line and created chaos in the enemy ranks. The creatures began to retreat, their coordination shattered. Their advance stopped by sunset. The Battle of Thever was over. The streets were filled with smoke and bodies, both human and craft. The surviving Marines gathered in the plaza where they had first landed, exhausted and bloodied, but alive. Sam Harper counted his people. He had started with 50. He now had 23. 27 soldiers had died defending a city on an alien world, fighting for people they had never known existed a month ago. High Counselor Thevron emerged from the shelters and approached Sam. The old alien was crying again, silver tears running down his face. "You saved us," he said. "Your people died for us. Why?" Sam thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about Danny Cole, charging into the enemy fleet. He thought about the soldiers who had fallen around him in the streets. He thought about the little girl who had given him a flower. "Because you needed help," he finally said. "And we could give it." Thevron did not understand. In 3,000 years, his people had never seen anything like this. They had never imagined that strangers could care so much about strangers. But Sam Harper understood. And as he looked up at the stars, where the battle still raged, he knew that this was only the beginning. The journey through hyperspace took 7 days. 7 days of quiet travel through a strange dimension where the normal rules of space did not apply. The crews of the human fleet used this time to prepare. They checked their weapons. They studied what little they knew about the craft. They wrote letters to their families back home. Just in case they never returned. Admiral Jake Preston spent most of his time on the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the strange lights of hyperspace. He thought about what waited for them on the other side. An alien world, an unknown enemy, a battle that might be impossible to win. On the 7th day, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Valoria Prime. What they saw made even the veteran soldiers go silent. The planet below was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents. But it was also dying. 2 of the 5 continents were completely black, covered in the remains of craft consumption. Massive fires burned across a 3rd continent. Smoke rose into the atmosphere, creating dark clouds that blocked out the sun. In orbit, the situation was even worse. Hundreds of craft ships floated around the planet like parasites feeding on a dying animal. They were organic vessels, grown instead of built. Their hulls looked like skin, covered in veins and strange growths. Some of them were the size of small moons. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Katie Morris, who had been transferred to the Resolute as a communications officer. "There are so many of them." Admiral Preston studied the enemy fleet with calm eyes. He had seen terrible things in his life. He had fought in wars where the odds seemed impossible. But he had never seen anything like this. "Begin scanning for survivors," he ordered. "And find me a place to land troops." The capital city of Thever was still standing, though barely. The craft had not reached it yet, but they were close. Commander Sam Harper led the first landing party, taking 50 Marines down to the planet's surface in armored shuttles. Sam was 35 years old, with short brown hair and arms covered in tattoos from his time in the service. He had fought in 3 different conflicts on Earth before joining the space fleet. He thought he knew what war looked like. He was wrong. The shuttle landed in a plaza in front of a great library. The building was ancient and beautiful, covered in symbols that Sam could not read. But he had no time to admire it. As soon as the doors opened, he saw the refugees. Thousands of Valorians were gathered in the plaza. They were tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. They had 4 arms and faces that were almost human, but not quite. Their eyes were larger, and they had no noses, only small slits. They looked at the humans with a mixture of fear and hope. An elderly Valorian pushed through the crowd and approached Sam. He was taller than the others, and wore robes that marked him as someone important. "I am Thevrin, High Counselor of Valoria," he said. His voice came from a small device around his neck that translated his words into English. "You answered our call." Sam looked at the alien and nodded. "Commander Sam Harper, United Earth Defense Force. We came as fast as we could." Thevrin stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the old alien began to tremble. Sam realized that he was crying. "We did not believe anyone would come," Thevrin said quietly. "We sent our message into the void, expecting nothing. And you came. From where? How far did you travel?" "Far enough," Sam said. "Now tell me what we are fighting." The Valorians had been studying the Krath since the invasion began, trying to understand their enemy. Dr. Claire Bennett, the fleet's xenobiologist, joined the Valorian scientists in their research center. She was a small woman with red hair and glasses, and she looked completely out of place among the tall silver aliens. But her mind was sharp, and she quickly understood what they were facing. "The Krath operate on a hive mind," she explained to Admiral Preston over a video link. "They are not individuals. They are all connected to central intelligence, like bees in a hive. The individual soldiers have no thoughts of their own. They simply follow orders from above." "Where do the orders come from?" Preston asked. "Queen ships," Claire said. "We have identified 3 of them, hiding behind the planet's moon. They are massive vessels, bigger than anything in our fleet. The Queens control everything. If we destroy them, the entire Krath force will collapse." Preston nodded slowly. It was good news and bad news. Good because they had a clear target. Bad because hitting that target would be nearly impossible. Meanwhile, on the ground, Sam Harper was learning about the Valorians. They were kind and gentle people who had never understood violence. They had built a civilization based on learning and cooperation. The idea of war was foreign to them. "You have no weapons at all?" Sam asked Serena, Thevrin's young advisor. "We have tools that could be used as weapons," she said. "But we never thought to use them that way. We believed all intelligent life would choose peace. We believed that we could talk to any enemy, find common ground, solve problems without fighting." Sam looked at the burning horizon, where Krath forces were getting closer every hour. "How did that work out?" Serena lowered her head. "The Krath do not talk. The Krath do not negotiate. They only consume. We tried to communicate with them when they first arrived. We sent our best diplomats to meet them. The Krath ate them. The human soldiers spent their first day setting up defensive positions around the city. They taught the Valorians how to build barriers and trenches. They showed them how to use the tools they had as weapons. The aliens learned quickly, but Sam could see the fear in their eyes. They were not fighters. They never had been. That night, Sam sat on the steps of the great library and looked up at the stars. The sky was filled with smoke and the distant glow of fires. Somewhere up there, Admiral Preston was preparing for battle. Somewhere out there, the Krath Queens were waiting. A young Valorian child approached him. She was small, barely reaching his waist, with bright silver skin and curious eyes. She held something in her 4 hands and offered it to him. It was a flower. Blue and delicate, probably one of the last flowers in the city. The child did not speak. She just held it out to him and waited. Sam took the flower and smiled. "Thank you," he said. The child smiled back. Then she ran off to join her family among the refugees. Sam looked at the flower for a long time. It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but it reminded him why he was here. Not for glory, not for Earth, but for this child and all the others like her who deserved a chance to grow up in peace. He tucked the flower into his pocket and went back to work. There was a battle coming, and he intended to win it. High above, Admiral Preston received the final reports from his captains. The fleet was ready. The plan was set. Tomorrow, they would attack the craft with everything they had. He knew the odds were against them. He knew that many of his people would die. But he also knew that giving up was not an option. The Valorians were counting on them. The universe was watching, and humanity would not let them down. "All ships, prepare for battle," he ordered. "Tomorrow, we show these monsters what humans are made of." The battle in orbit had paused, but it was not over. The craft fleet had pulled back behind the moon, regrouping around their queen ships. They had lost many vessels, but they still outnumbered the humans by far. It was only a matter of time before they attacked again. Admiral Preston met with his surviving captains in the damaged war room of the Resolute. The mood was grim. They had won the first round, but the cost had been terrible. 5 ships destroyed, hundreds dead, and the enemy queens were still alive. "We cannot win a straight fight," said Captain Ben Taylor of the cruiser Guardian. He was an older man, close to retirement age, with a calm voice and steady hands. "They have too many ships. Even if we destroy half of them, the other half will overwhelm us." Dr. Claire Bennett spoke up from the corner. She had been studying the craft non-stop since arriving at Valoria Prime, barely sleeping or eating. Her eyes were tired, but her voice was strong. "We do not need to destroy their fleet," she said. "We just need to destroy the queens. If the queens die, the hive mind collapses. The individual craft become mindless animals without direction. The entire invasion falls apart." Preston nodded slowly. He had known this was coming. The only way to win was to go after the queens directly. But that meant sending people into the heart of the enemy formation. "I need volunteers," he said. "A small strike team to board one of the queen ships and destroy it from inside." Every hand in the room went up. Lieutenant Laura Kim was chosen to pilot the assault shuttle. She was the best pilot in the fleet, a young woman from California with quick reflexes and nerves of steel. She had flown through asteroid fields and enemy fire without flinching. This mission would be the hardest of her life. Sergeant Nick Torres was chosen to lead the ground team. He had proven himself in the streets of Thever, fighting with courage that inspired everyone around him. He'd picked 19 soldiers for the mission, all volunteers who knew they might not return. The youngest was Private Greg Palmer. He was only 19 years old, fresh from basic training, with a boyish face that made him look even younger. Some of the other soldiers thought he was too young for such a dangerous mission. But Greg had insisted. "I did not come all this way to sit on the sidelines," he said when asked why he volunteered. "I want to help. I need to help." The mission briefing was short. Larva would fly the shuttle through the enemy formation and attach to one of the queen ships. The team would cut their way inside, fight to the central chamber where the queen lived, and destroy her with a nuclear device they carried. It was a simple plan. It was also almost certainly a suicide mission. That night, the team gathered in the shuttle bay to prepare. Some of them wrote letters to their families. Some of them sat quietly, thinking about what waited for them. Some of them joked and laughed, trying to keep the fear away. Greg Palmer sat alone, staring at a photograph of his mother. She was a schoolteacher back in Ohio, a kind woman who had raised him alone after his father died. He had not told her about this mission. He did not want her to worry. Nick Torres sat down next to him. "You okay, kid?" Greg looked up and tried to smile. "Just thinking about home. About my mom. I hope she will be proud of me." Nick put a hand on his shoulder. "She will be. No matter what happens, she will be proud." The shuttle launched at midnight when the craft fleet was at its most dispersed. Lavra Kim flew like she had never flown before, weaving through enemy fighters and dodging energy blasts. The shuttle was hit 3 times, but she kept it flying, pushing the engines past their limits. "Approaching the Queen ship," she reported. 30 seconds to contact. The Queen ship was enormous, bigger than anything the team had imagined. It looked like a living mountain floating in space, covered in veins and strange organs. Strange sounds came from inside it, deep groaning noises that seemed almost like words. Lavra attached the shuttle to the hull, and Nick led the team out. They cut through the organic skin with plasma torches and dropped into a corridor that looked like the inside of a stomach. The walls were wet and pulsing. The air smelled like death. "Stay together," Nick ordered. "Move fast." They had barely taken 10 steps when the craft defenders found them. The creatures came from everywhere at once, pouring out of holes in the walls and ceiling. They were smaller than the soldiers outside, but there were hundreds of them. The team opened fire. The corridor exploded with light and noise as humans and monsters clashed. Private Amy Mitchell went down with a craft claw in her shoulder. Corporal Jose Martinez pulled her to safety while firing his rifle one-handed. "Keep moving," Nick shouted. "Do not stop." They fought their way through corridor after corridor, following the path that Dr. Bennett had mapped out from the captured craft data. Every step was a battle. Every corner hid more enemies. The team lost soldiers with each passing med dot. By the time they reached the Queen chamber, only 8 of them were left. The chamber was vast, a cavern at the heart of the ship where the Queen herself waited. She was a nightmare made flesh, a creature the size of a building with a massive brain visible through her skull. She screamed when she saw them, and the scream was not just sound. It was a psychic attack, a wave of pure terror that hit their minds like a hammer. 2 soldiers fell to their knees, unable to move. One dropped his weapon and started crying. But Nick Torres gritted his teeth and raised his rifle. "You do not scare me," he said. Then he opened fire. The team attacked with everything they had. Bullets and grenades slammed into the Queen's body, tearing chunks from her flesh. She screamed again and again, calling for her children to protect her. More craft poured into the chamber, surrounding the humans. "Set the device," Nick ordered. "We are out of time." Greg Palmer was carrying the nuclear bomb. He was the youngest, the smallest, the fastest. He ran toward the Queen while the others covered him, dodging claws and teeth and reaching the base of the massive creature. He armed the device with shaking hands. 10 minutes until detonation. Plenty of time to escape. Then a craft claw pierced his leg. Greg fell, screaming in pain. He looked down and saw blood pouring from the wound. He could not walk. He could barely move. Nick rushed to his side and tried to lift him. "Come on, kid. We need to go." But Greg shook his head. He looked at the device, then at the Queen, then at Nick. His eyes were calm now, the fear replaced by something else. Determination. Purpose. "The timer might not work," Greg said quietly. "Someone needs to stay and make sure she dies." Nick's face went pale. "No, we will carry you. We will find a way." Greg pushed him away. "There is no time. You need to go. Get the others out. Tell my mom I love her." Nick wanted to argue. He wanted to pick up the kid and run. But he looked at the wound, at the Krath swarming around them, at the Queen still screaming for blood, and he knew Greg was right. "You are a hero," Nick said, his voice breaking. "You are the bravest damn kid I've ever met." Greg smiled. "Just tell my mom." The surviving team members ran. They fought their way back through the corridors, back to the shuttle, back to Lara Kim, who was still waiting with engines running. They launched just as the countdown reached 0. The nuclear explosion lit up the void like a new sun. The Queen ship erupted from within, its organic hull vaporizing in the atomic fire. Greg Palmer died instantly, feeling no pain, knowing that his sacrifice had meant something. Across the system, the Krath went silent. Without the Queen's voice in their heads, they stopped moving, stopped fighting, stopped everything. They were just animals now, lost and confused without their mother, on the Resolute. Admiral Preston watched the explosion and whispered a prayer for the young soldier who had given everything. "One down," he said quietly. 2 to go. The destruction of the first Queen changed everything. The Krath fleet fell into chaos. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination now drifted aimlessly, their crews confused without the guiding voice in their heads. The remaining 2 Queens tried to restore order, but the damage was done. The hive mind was fractured. Admiral Preston saw his opportunity and seized it. "All ships, attack," he ordered. "Target the remaining Queen ships. End this now." The battered human fleet surged forward. The Resolute led the charge, her damaged hull groaning under the strain of full speed. Behind her came the Guardian, the Striker, and a handful of other vessels that had survived the first battle. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on empty. But they kept fighting. Captain Ben Taylor of the Guardian saw a path through the Krath formation. He pushed his ship to the limit, breaking through enemy lines and heading straight for the second Queen ship. Krath vessels tried to block him, but he dodged and weaved through their fire. "Captain, we cannot take much more damage," his first officer warned. Ben smiled grimly. "We do not need to last long, just long enough." The Guardian slammed into the second Queen ship at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. Both vessels crumpled together in a tangle of metal and organic matter. The resulting explosion destroyed everything within a mile radius. Ben Taylor and his crew died instantly. But they took the second Queen with them. Now only 1 Queen remained. She was hiding behind a wall of her most loyal ships, screaming orders into the fractured hive mind. But her children were too confused to obey properly. The coordinated defense collapsed into individual ships. Fighting alone, Admiral Preston directed the final assault from the bridge of the Resolute. His ship was barely holding together. Half the systems were offline. Fires burned in a dozen compartments. But the old admiral refused to leave his post. "All batteries, target the Queen ship," he ordered. "Everything we have." Missiles and energy beams converged on the final Queen. Her defenders tried to shield her, but they were too disorganized. One by one, they were destroyed. Finally, the Queen ship itself was exposed. The Resolute's main gun fired one last time. The beam cut through the Queen ship like a knife through paper, hitting the chamber where the Queen herself waited. She had time to scream once before the explosion consumed her. Silence fell across the system. The Krath stopped fighting. They stopped moving. Without the Queens, they had no purpose, no direction, no reason to exist. Some of them simply shut down. Others began attacking each other in confusion. Within hours, the once mighty swarm had destroyed itself. On the surface of Valoria Prime, Sam Harper watched the sky clear for the first time in weeks. The smoke was still there, but it was fading. The fires were still burning, but they were dying out. The nightmare was over. The Valorians emerged from their shelters slowly, unable to believe that they had survived. They looked around at their ruined city, their devastated world, and they wept. But they were tears of joy as much as sorrow. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. High Counselor Theverin found Sam standing in the plaza, staring at the sky. The old alien walked up beside him and stood in silence for a long moment. "It is over," Theverin finally said. "It is over," Sam agreed. Theverin turned to face the human commander. His silver skin was marked with dust and burns, and his robes were torn. But his eyes were bright with emotion. "Your people saved us," he said. "You came from across the galaxy to fight for strangers. You sacrificed your ships, your soldiers, your lives. And you asked for nothing in return." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "We do not understand. In 3,000 years, we have never seen anything like this. Why? Why did you do it?" Sam thought about the question. He thought about Admiral Preston, who had led the fleet into impossible odds. He thought about Danny Cole and Ben Taylor, who had died breaking the enemy lines. He thought about Greg Palmer, a 19-year-old kid who had stayed behind to make sure the Queen died. "Because you needed help," Sam said simply. "That is what humans do. When someone is in trouble, we help. It does not matter if we know them. It does not matter if they can pay us back. We just help." Theverin shook his head slowly. "We have met many species in our history. Some were kind. Some were cruel. But we have never met a species like yours. You are loud and emotional, and sometimes violent. But you are also brave and generous and loyal. You are not what we expected." Sam smiled. "We get that a lot." The funeral service was held 3 days later in the plaza of Thever. Over 3,000 human soldiers had died in the battle, along with hundreds of Valorians who had fought beside them. Their names were read aloud, one by one, as both species stood together in silence. Admiral Preston attended the ceremony, though he could barely stand. He had not slept since the battle began. He had lost so many people, so many friends. Each name was a knife in his heart. When the names were finished, he stepped forward to speak. The crowd of humans and Valorians watched him with respect and gratitude. "We came to this world because someone needed help," Preston said. His voice was tired but strong. "We did not know if we could win. We did not know if any of us would survive. But we came anyway, because that is who we are. Humans do not abandon those in need. We fight for strangers. We die for people we have never met. Not because we want glory or reward, but because it is the right thing to do." He paused, looking out at the mixed crowd. "The soldiers we honor today did not die for Earth. They died for Valoria. They died for freedom. They died for hope. And because of their sacrifice, this world will live. Its people will rebuild. Its children will grow up in peace. That is the legacy of the fallen. That is what their lives were worth." After the ceremony, the surviving human ships prepared to return home. They were battered and broken, barely able to fly. But they had accomplished their mission. They had saved an entire civilization. Theverin came to say goodbye to Admiral Preston before the fleet departed. "What will you tell your people?" the old alien asked. "When you return home, what will you say?" Preston thought for a moment. "I will tell them that we found friends among the stars. I will tell them that the universe is vast and strange and sometimes dangerous, but also full of wonder. And I will tell them that when we heard someone crying for help, we answered. That is the story I will tell." Theverin reached out and touched Preston's hand with one of his own 4 hands. It was a gesture of respect among the Valorians, reserved for the greatest of heroes. "Your species is young," Theverin said, "but you have taught us something that we forgot long ago. You have taught us that courage and compassion are stronger than any weapon. You have taught us that hope is never lost as long as someone is willing to fight for it." Preston smiled. And you have taught us that the galaxy is not as empty as we thought. There are good people out there. People worth fighting for. The human fleet departed the next morning. They flew into the sunrise, their damaged ship silhouetted against the light. On the ground below, thousands of Valorians watched them go, waving goodbye to the strangers who had become their greatest friends. In the weeks and months that followed, the story spread across the galaxy. Other species heard about the small fleet from Earth that had crossed unknown space to save a dying world. They heard about the soldiers who had fought and died for aliens they had never met. They heard about the answer the humans gave when asked why they came. Because you needed help. That is reason enough. And across the cosmos, species who had long felt alone in the universe began to look toward the stars with new eyes. They began to wonder if help might come for them too, someday, if they ever needed it. They began to feel something they had not felt in centuries. Hope. The Valorians rebuilt their world over the following years. They built monuments to the human soldiers who had died for them. They named schools and hospitals after Admiral Preston and Commander Harper. And every year, on the anniversary of their salvation, they held a celebration called the Day of the Answering. It was a day to remember that someone had heard their call. Someone had cared enough to come. Someone had been willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. It was a day to remember the humans. And far away, on a small blue planet called Earth, the survivors of the Valoria campaign gathered to remember their fallen friends. They raised their glasses to Danny Cole and Ben Taylor. They wept for Greg Palmer and all the others who never came home. And they looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, a whole civilization was alive because of them. That was the human way. That was what made them special. Not their technology or their weapons or their numbers, but their heart. Their stubborn, beautiful, impossible heart that would never abandon those in need. The galaxy had asked for help, and the humans had shown up. They always would.